Would you please stand for the reading of God's word? Thank you. We're going to be reading from John chapter 6 this morning. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Thanks, Joe. And good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday to you. If you have a Bible, go ahead and grab it and turn to John chapter 6, where we have arrived in the longest chapter in not only John's gospel, but the entire New Testament. And don't worry, we're not going to do the whole thing today. We're just going to be looking at those 21 verses that Pastor Joe read for us. But before we do, I just kind of want to give you a heads up as to here's where we're going over the next few weeks together. Today, we're going to look at this really famous miracle that Jesus did. And then next week, we're going to look at a sermon that Jesus gives to the crowd about this miracle. And then in 3 weeks, we're going to see this crowd and really Jesus' own disciples will be confronted with this decision. Do they want the life that Jesus is holding out to them here? Or do they want to kind of keep living a life that is safe and nice and neat and tucked under their own control? And so all of this chapter goes together, but it would be a very long sermon, and I'm not Jesus. I can't multiply lunch for you if I preach too long. So we're going to take it in 3 weeks. They all go together, and we're going to start off today with this really famous miracle Jesus did. Now, just out of curiosity, as we get going here, how many of you have heard this story before? Yeah, this is one of the most famous miracles of Jesus. In fact, it is the only miracle of Jesus recorded in all 4 gospel accounts of his life, unless you count the resurrection, which is quite the miracle. But this is the one miracle story that all 4 biographers of Jesus said, we have got to include this one. And is that a spider web? Sorry, I look like I'm like chopping at air here. That's not me being Italian. That's me going, there was something there. All right. And I told you, if you were here when we kicked off this series, I told you that John's gospel was written last after Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so being written last, he is able to include details that the other gospels didn't have. And this story is no exception. We get some unique details about this really famous story in the life of Jesus. And so here's what I want to do this morning. I want to take you through the story. Because this is an amazing miracle. And I don't want to just skip past the message that is plainly on the surface for all of us. And as we do kind of go through the story together, what I want to do is I want to take you through some of these additional details that John gives us. Because what I found as I study this week is as you dig into these details, this story can kind of begin to pop from, I don't know about you, like I think about the flannel boards and goldfish crackers when I hear this story. And again, there's something simple and powerful about this story that's there, but there's also another layer where this can go from being a cool story about Jesus to a powerful story for your life. Are you ready to get beyond the flannel boards today? All right, then let's go. John chapter 6. I normally have fancy headings for you. I don't have headings for you today. Sorry, note takers. This story is so cool. We're just going to walk through it, starting with the setting. So when we pick it up, we learn that Jesus has left Jerusalem, where we saw him last week, and he has now gone back up towards the Sea of Galilee, which John tells us at this point in history is now known as the Sea of Tiberias. And what's going on there is a local Roman ruler had come in, and he had renamed this lake that had so much meaning for the people of God, he had renamed it after himself. And so just to put you in the historical moment, this would be like if Canada invaded America and they renamed Lake Tahoe like Lake Trudeau or something like that. This regional figure invades a land that's not his. He takes it over. He starts renaming stuff that has tons of history and weight and meaning to the people in that region. And I just think it's interesting. John includes that detail. He's like, they call it Tiberias, but we really know it's Lake Tahoe. It's Lake Tahoe. And in verse 2, we see that Jesus, he looks up around the Sea of Galilee and he sees a large crowd gathering around him. And when John says large, he's not exaggerating. We will learn later in the story that when they count the men, there are some 5,000 men present. And the commentators will say when you include the women and the children, I'm not sure how they do the math on all of this, but there's pretty good agreement that you're looking from anywhere from kind of 12 to 15,000 on the conservative end to maybe 20,000 people in this crowd. And so if you could just picture the Chase Center being packed out, that's the crowd that's here to see Jesus. A large crowd is gathering around Jesus, and don't miss why John says they're there. It's not because they're committed disciples who want to learn from Jesus how to live. It's not that they're coming together like Pastor Phil mentioned earlier. We're here to worship Jesus together this morning. They're not committed. They're not in yet. They're there because they saw the signs he was doing on the sick. Kind of a modern equivalent to this crowd would be the person who has Bible verses in their social media bio, but their life shows no seriousness about following Jesus. They're intrigued by Jesus. I'm sure some of you have friends like this where they're intrigued by Jesus so much so that they might go to church from time to time, but they're not committed. There's no real relationship with Jesus there. And I want you to hang on to this because this detail is going to matter, especially next week when we get into what Jesus wants to say to the crowd. This crowd is intrigued by Jesus, but they are not yet disciples of Jesus. And look at how Jesus reacts to this crowd. I wonder what you're expecting. Verse 5. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" I want to make just a simple observation. Jesus sees a large crowd of vaguely interested people, and his reaction isn't, "You should be more committed." His reaction is, "I want to feed them. I want to meet them where they're at. I want to minister to them, and you'll see this next week. He does want to take them deeper. There is more than being intrigued by Jesus. And so if you're here this morning and you're in that category where you're intrigued by Jesus, not quite committed to Jesus yet, I don't want you to hear me coming down on you at all. In fact, I'm glad that you're here. The fact that you've heard enough, seen enough about Jesus to be intrigued, and that you would join us on a Sunday and lean in and want to learn about Jesus, I think it's incredible you're here, just like I think it's incredible that that crowd is there. And my hope for you would be that you would see this morning that Jesus sees you, and he wants to satisfy the deep longings of your soul. But I'm getting ahead of myself right now. Where are we at here in notes? Jesus, he wants to feed this crowd. And so, I forgot to tell you this. If you look at Matthew and Mark, if you kind of compare the accounts, and I have all the verses in the worship guide for you, you will learn that this crowd, they kind of followed Jesus out into the wilderness, out into a desolate place, meaning there's not a Chick-fil-A around for miles. And so Jesus sees this crowd, and he wants to feed them. And so watch what he does. He says to Philip, "Philip, what should we do?" And don't miss verse 6. He said this to test him, for he knew what he would do. Jesus does this. He tests his disciples. Note takers, you could write that down. Jesus does this. He tests his disciples. And man, I hope as you're making disciples that you would test your disciples. Don't just give someone a book to read and put more information in their head and call that discipleship. That's information transfer. What discipleship is it's about bringing our whole lives under the transforming love and leadership of Jesus. And the way to know if God is really changing someone's life is to test them. Let me give you an example. I think intuitively you understand this. You might think you're a really patient, loving, kind person until you have to go to the DMV. Then, right, some things come out of you and you're like, I didn't know that was there. This is why God tests his people repeatedly throughout the Bible. We saw this last year as we looked at the life of Joseph being tested in Egypt. You'll see this throughout the Bible. You're seeing it again here. God tests his people, and it's important that you'll understand why he's doing this. It's not that God doesn't know what's inside of us. Like, let me be really clear about this. It's not like Jesus is like, I wonder where Philip's heart is at. I'm not sure. Let me give him a test. He's been walking with Philip for a long time now. Philip's been a disciple of Jesus for several chapters now. We learned back in chapter 2, Jesus knows what's in the hearts of other people already. So it's not that God tests us because he's kind of unsure and needs to figure out what's going to come out of us. God tests us not because he doesn't know, but because often we don't know what's in our own hearts. And so God will do what he does with his disciple Philip here. He will test us from time to time to reveal our hearts to us, to show us what's in us. So when we lose it at the DMV and cuss someone out, we can talk to Jesus about that. What comes out of Philip, it's not great. Verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. Please keep in mind at this moment that Philip is one of the 12 disciples. Philip was at the wedding in Cana. Are you tracking where I'm going with this? Yep. Philip saw Jesus take a bunch of water and turn it into wine. So kind of what you're looking for in this moment, right, is, well, Jesus, I mean, you do wine. Do you do bread too? That would be a great thing for Philip to say in this moment. That's kind of what John's setting you up for. Maybe this is some time later, but it's only a couple of chapters later for us that are reading this. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't even reference Jesus at all. Here's what Philip's test reveals in his heart. For all he knows about Jesus in his head, his heart is still so closed off to the possibilities of faith. He might be able to articulate that Jesus is the Messiah, like he said back in chapter 1, but that is clearly theory to this man. It has not worked its way into his soul. Because if you're tracking with the guy that could turn water into wine is here, I'm just not sure it's that much of a stretch. But Peter's taking stray bullets today. Philip's response is essentially a faithless one. I don't know, Jesus, that's impossible. Even if we had an entire annual salary, we couldn't even give these people a single bite. That's a Chase Center, Jesus. There's no way we could possibly feed this crowd. Now, Philip, though, he's not the only one to speak up. So Philip's test doesn't reveal something great in him, but now watch this, verse 8. One of his other disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Now, here's what I love about Andrew's response. He begins with a little bit of faith, right? He says to Jesus, hey, there's this kid here. He's got 5 barley loaves. And I don't know if this will be useful to you. This really helped my imagination this week. I always picture that as like the large loaves from Safeway. The commentators are saying actually barley was the bread of the poor. That this would very likely be a very small cake that his mama kind of packed for him as they went out to go see Jesus for the day. And I don't know that it makes a big difference because even 5 full loaves from Safeway would barely feed this room, much less the Chase Center full of people. But I just thought, to use your imagination, it kind of feels like this kid is there. We were just on a road trip, and we had like a leftover Happy Meal in the back seat. That's kind of what it feels like is going on here. He's got a couple of chicken nuggets left, a couple of fries, and Andrew's like, well, Jesus, there's this kid who's got a half-eaten Happy Meal. He begins with a glimmer of faith, but then it's like he breaks off mid-sentence and says, but what is this for so many? Have you ever been there where you had a problem in your life and by God's grace, you were open to the possibilities of faith. You brought it to God. You prayed about it for like a minute. And then you just kind of tail off and go, this isn't going to do anything. I better go get busy. Prayer doesn't do anything. I got to go fix this one myself. God helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible, by the way. This is where Andrew's at. And here's what I'll say for Andrew. I think this is actually progress. We don't know what Andrew was like before he met Jesus, but I imagine before he met Jesus, he doesn't even start with the little boy's got a Happy Meal here. He's probably in the Philip camp of that's impossible. He starts with the glimmer of faith. And yes, he breaks off, but it's progress. He's growing. He's learning to open to the possibilities of faith. So I think his response is to be celebrated. Here's what we're going to see in this story. Jesus, he can do a lot with our messy, imperfect faith. So Andrew's got like, Jesus will say elsewhere, like a mustard seed of faith. It's weak, it's wobbly, it's barely there, but he does at least reach out to Jesus. And now, that brings us to the miracle. Look what Jesus does with that little glimmer of faith. Verse 10. Jesus said, you know what I want to invite you to do? I want to invite you to close your eyes and just picture this. We've heard it read once. I'm going to read it again. I want to invite you just to use your holy imagination and picture this as I read, to picture the story. Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now, there was much grass in that place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. All right, you can open your eyes now. Let's do a little participation here. How did you picture it? Like in your mind, was Jesus kind of doing the pull the rabbit out of the hat thing, where he reaches into the basket and just more keeps coming out? Did any of you picture just as their heads are bowed and Jesus is giving thanks, it's just like stuff drops down from heaven? I'm genuinely curious. Anyone, like I've always pictured the rabbit out of the hat thing. Yeah, okay, so I'm not the only individual. Anyone else have a creative, just how did you picture it? Growing like flowers out of the ground. Matthew, I saw something like this. Maybe you're kind of there too. Grow like flowers. That's cool. I hadn't thought of that. You could infinitely break bread off of a piece of it. Very cool. Yeah. We're using our holy imaginations here, guys, to enter into the text. Can I tell you how he did it? I have no idea. I'm inclined to think Colton nailed it there. They just, I don't know. I don't know how he did it. Here's what I do know. I want to be real honest with what we do know. Somehow, 5 loaves and 2 fish in the hands of Jesus multiply to feed 20,000 people. That is what we call a miracle. Or John actually prefers the term, and he always uses this term. He calls it a sign. And the reason John prefers the term sign is because a miracle is like me pulling a rabbit out of a hat. If I could do that, you'd be like, wow, church is so much more entertaining this week. Pastor's got tricks. But a sign isn't just something to wow you for wow's sake. A sign is pointing to something. You remember I might have told you some weeks back that if you're going to Disneyland and you stop at the sign and you like get your snacks out of the car and celebrate and take pictures by the signs, we're all going to think you're weirdos. The sign is meant to point you to something that's great. And so this miracle, it's a feast. It's amazing. And I love that Jesus doesn't just feed everybody enough that they're satisfied, but he makes leftovers. Enough for each of his 12 doubting disciples to have a take-home bag. That's a flex, man. Like the text doesn't tell us, but I just picture like he's looking at Philip as he picks it up going, interesting. I don't know. I'm using here's the thing. John calls this a sign. And so when you read that, the question I want to train you to ask in John's gospel is, well, what is this sign pointing towards? What is the purpose of this miracle? And let me tell you what the purpose of this miracle can't be. And this is becoming a popular idea in modern times. Some people will look at this story and say, you know what this is about? This story is about generosity and about sharing. And basically the idea, and there are real Bible scholars with real PhDs, I don't know where they get them from, like a Cracker Jack box or something, and what they will say is, Jesus, he was teaching the crowds, we know from the other gospels, so maybe they heard Jesus' teaching about loving your neighbor, and when the crowd saw the little boy kind of give his like half a Happy Meal left, it kind of unlocked the greed in their hearts, and they began to share, and the food that they kind of were hoarding away like greedy capitalists, they just kind of finally let it out, and everyone had enough to eat. It's a sharing miracle. Now, every parent with a child under 5 wants to teach it that way, right? Share. Be like Jesus. And here's what I'll say. There are other passages in the Bible that should say you should share what you have, make sure your family, your church family, your community is well taken care of. So we can do that from the Bible. This is not that story, though. This is not that story. And can I show you why? Like, you don't have to have a Bible degree. You just have to read the text. Allow me to point out verse 13. So they gathered them up and filled the baskets with the fragments from what? Where did the fragments come from? 5 barley. The 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. So here's my official theological review of the very nuanced sounding position that this is an ethical miracle, not a physical one. That can't be the point of it. John's very clear. Jesus took these 5 loaves, and somehow from the 5, it fed everyone, and it made leftovers. This is a physical miracle. If you have trouble with the idea, like I get struggling with, like, I've never seen anything like this, but the heart of our faith is about an even greater miracle that a dead guy walked out of the grave again. So at some point, you're going to have to deal with what you think about miracles, even if you want to push that all the way back to creation. Someone told one of my girls at school this week, well, God didn't make the world, Adam's did. And my 10-year-old said back to her, I was so proud, she said, who made Adams? It's the proudest moment as a dad. I'm like, at some point, we're probably going to have to deal with the snark and the sass with which that was said. I think I know where you get that from, but... Everyone believes in miracles. Everyone. And so John's telling us this. So, okay, it can't be about generosity, though, again, the Bible's going to say be generous and share what you have. So if you have the kid under 5 and you're trying to teach them to share with their sister, their brother, hit me up after service. I'll give you the Bible verse, chapter and verse for it. But don't ruin this story. For a better interpretation, there's a pastor friend of mine who says what this story is about is it's about teaching people Jesus math. What he's saying there is 5 plus 2 plus Jesus equals 20,000. The math doesn't math unless Jesus is God. He's the great wonder worker. He's like that thing in math that you could tell I never got very far in math, but there are numbers and things that can just blow up the whole equation. And so I've got a pastor friend preached a great sermon on this about how this is teaching us Jesus math. And really what this story is here to do, it's to teach us to be like that boy or to be like Andrew and just say, Jesus, I don't have much, but here's what I got. Could you multiply this and do something with it? And I absolutely think that is the plain reading of the story that's there across all 4 Gospels, that Jesus provides for his people. He can do more than we could ask or imagine. So let's take to him our little half-eaten Happy Meals, our half-hearted faith, and say, Jesus, I'm going to reach out to you. I don't have it all figured out. Could you do something with it? I absolutely believe that is part of what John is communicating here. I would also say, though, that while that is true, and while that is at least tethered to this text, I think John is doing something more than simply teaching us Jesus math. And the reason I say that is verse 4. You get this interesting little reference you don't get in the other accounts. Verse 4 says, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. And Passover, it's not a big deal to most of us. But for a first century Jew, this would be kind of like their 4th of July. This was like their big Are you guys not 4th of July people? I was like, I've seen some of you on Facebook, what you do on 4th of July. Some of you break the law with fireworks, all right? This is their big holiday. This is a huge source of their sense of who they are as a people and their understanding of just what are we doing here in the world. So John, it's not a random passing reference he puts this here. This is a very particular time for God's people. And I think that verse there kind of explains the reaction of the crowd you get in verse 15. When it says, after Jesus feeds them, he teaches them Jesus math, 5 plus 2 plus Jesus equals 20,000. Their reaction is not simply, well, I should talk to Jesus about the needs in my life. Their reaction is they want to take him by force and make him king. See, these people, they've been under the boot of Roman oppression for so long that they see the power in Jesus and they think this guy will be like the new Moses. Passover time was all about how God raised up a leader named Moses to deliver his people from the evil empire of Egypt and to carry them into the promised land. And so it's Passover time. All of those ideas are being stoked in the moment. They see a leader that seems great like Jesus. He's got power. And their instinct is, this guy will be like Moses, except instead of delivering us from Egypt, he's going to deliver us by Rome. So let's take him and by force kill anyone who gets in our way. And we're going to look at Jesus' reaction to the crowd next week. So make sure to come back for that. Actually, really, next week is a cool message. Jesus has a lot for us next week. For today, though, I just want to show you one more test Jesus has for his disciples in all of this. So take the crowd, kind of put that to the side for the next week. We're going to stick to the disciples this morning. He's already tested them once. Now they've seen this great miracle. And the question is, are they learning that they can trust Jesus with their problems? Are they learning Jesus math yet? Verse 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. Now, if you read the other Gospels, you'll see Jesus actually sends them away. He sees the crowd kind of going nuts. He's like, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go pray, which is fun aside. If Jesus needed time alone with the Father to talk, maybe it's possible that you and I need some dedicated prayer time in our life with God, just something to pray about. Jesus, he sneaks away, and then he tells his disciples as he's getting out of there, hey, you guys go across the lake, and I'll meet you on the other side. Cool? Okay, they get in the boat. And now here's the test. Jesus is away on the mountain praying. How are they going to do without Jesus there with them? That's the test. And here's why I say this is a test. I know it could sound strange to frame it that way, but for a first century Jew, the sea was not a place of comfort. This is hard for us to grasp as Californians because we love to go to the ocean and look out and just go, wow, look at what God did there. Someone get me like a thing of plastic that I could go ride those waves. Like, this is how we think about the ocean. This is not how an ancient Jewish person would think about the ocean. They were not a seafaring people. In fact, much of the literature in the Old Testament, in the poetry, when sea comes up, it's imagery of death and drowning and chaos and death. And so these guys, simply by the fact of being out on the water, they're already freaked out at this point. And then, verse 18 happens. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing, to which I feel like if Philip were here, he would say, see, you laughed at me for not liking the sea, but this is exactly why. We know that the wind could come up on the Sea of Galilee and go nuts like this. And sorry, we didn't have big tankers or cruise ships to hide in like you to where you could take a vacation on one. They had small wooden boats that could easily be torn apart. And so they're already like, the Hebrew scriptures have prepared them that water is chaos and death and must be conquered by God. It is the grave. They would use it as a picture of death when baptism comes. That's already in the back of their minds. And then this would be like if you had a fear of flying and then you got on an airplane and it was the worst turbulence of your life. Like, this is why we don't do this. The wind is pounding, the waves are going nuts. And then we read in verse 19, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea. And coming near the boat, and they were frightened. Now, at one level, I get it. Because for as much as I love the ocean, if I'm out there in a tiny little wooden boat and waves are going over the top, at that point I'm probably like, I'm out. I'm probably screaming, crying, thinking I'm going to die, just like these guys. But at another level, is there any part of you that's like, we're told that they rowed for 3 or 4 miles. I looked it up this week because I've never rowed much, clearly. On a calm day, that would take about an hour. So they're out there for at least an hour. I mean, it's not a calm day, so it's more than an hour, fighting against the wind and waves. And what verb do we get? Praying? No. They're rowing, they're trying, and they're freaking out. This is Philip looking out at the crowd going, this is impossible all over again. It doesn't even dawn on them that, hey, maybe the guy that fed an entire stadium full of people with the little boy's Happy Meal could help us right now. They're just, again, they're so fixated on their problems. It's the same. This is why these two stories go together. In all four Gospels, they're put right together. It's the same dynamic I would submit to you going on in the disciples. They're so focused on their problems, they don't even see Jesus. They completely forgot, even as I like to imagine the leftovers are sitting at their feet. Now, the text doesn't say that, but I'm like, 12 bags left over, where to go? Just go with me here. The leftovers are like literally brushing up against their feet, and they're like, what are we going to do? It's not their proudest moment. They freak out. And in Mark's gospel, he actually says they thought when they saw Jesus walking towards them, because maybe you're thinking, you see Jesus walking towards you, that's where you're supposed to be. Oh, cool, we'll be fine. But they get more terrified, and the reason is they don't even recognize Jesus. And this is how life works sometimes. When you're in a storm, when you're in a crazy season, sometimes you don't even recognize the hand of God in it. Jesus is right there with them. They don't understand it's Jesus. They think he is a ghost. And so put it all together. They think the sea is death. They're being tossed and turned. They're like, this confirms every fear I have. And then they look out and see a ghost. They're like, he's going to take us down to the realm of the dead. This is why they are freaking out and screaming and crying out for their lives. And I want you to now watch what Jesus says to his fearful and his doubting and forgetful followers. Verse 20. But he said to them, it is I. Do not be afraid. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at land on the other side where they were going. Here's the point. Jesus is more than Moses. Jesus is more than Moses. That's not just the point of the walking on water. I would submit to you it's the point of this whole thing we've looked at this morning. Now, if you're like, where'd you get Moses from? Remember, the whole story is set against the backdrop of Passover, when this great leader of God's people named Moses leads them out of Egypt. Does anybody remember what happened after Passover when Pharaoh finally lets the people go and they leave Egypt? What's the first thing that happens? The sea. They are put up against the sea, which now you know because your pastor told you that, man, this would be a picture of death. This is why in Exodus they cry, why did God bring us out here just to kill us at the sea? And what happens next? Parted the Red Sea. Some of you need to see the Charlton Heston movie about this. Or read the book of Exodus. I'm a pastor. Read the book of Exodus. Yes, yes. He parts the Red Sea. He cries out to God, and he's like, God, what are we going to do? And God's like, part the Red Sea. And so Moses, he parts the Red Sea. The people walk by on dry ground. It's a miracle. They go to safety on the other side. And then do you know what happens once they get to the other side? Moses goes up on a mountain, which is where the story is taking place, on a mountain. God does great things on the mountain throughout the Bible. He gets God's law, which isn't about keeping people down. It's about lining us up for the good life. Some other things happen while he's on the mountain. I don't have the time for it, though there's a great series on YouTube called The Promised Land. It's a comedy, but it actually takes you into the truth of what's going on at Mount Sinai there. I should always think through before I actually make recommendations. Look into it before you watch it. I think I can recommend this. Yeah, Karen says yes. Don't know why you're catching strays now. Send the email to Karen. I'm just kidding. He goes up on the mountain. A lot happens on the mountain, but then here's something that happens in the wilderness. As they are on their way to their home in the Promised Land, every morning, God provides what for them on the ground? Manna. What's manna if you don't have a background in church? What would you describe it as? Bread. Are you seeing the parallels between these stories? Wonder-working power to bring bread out of thin air. Power over the waves and the sea to deliver God's fearful and forgetful people. But here's something Moses never does. And this is where, for all the similarities, there's a great contrast in this story. And I believe this is where we draw our main point. Moses never once shows up to God's people and says, "Take heart, everybody, I am here." Never once. Go read the book of Exodus. In fact, he's like, "I'm not worthy to lead your people. I'm a mere man. I'm not going to be very helpful. I have an anger problem. Like, I killed a guy." There's a lot going on there. Moses never shows up and says to the people of Israel, "Take heart, it is I, Moses." In fact, if you know the story in Exodus chapter 33, after some not great stuff happens while he's on the mountain, the people doing some stuff at the bottom of the mountain, Moses says to the Lord, "If your presence won't go with us, I don't want to go to the promised land. Because I'm not looking for a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm looking for you. And if you're not going, I'm staying in this desert where you are here. Because I'd rather live my life in the desert with the King of Glory than to go into the promised land without him." And there's this beautiful, beautiful thing God says to Moses. He says to him, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And then we're told the angel of the Lord leads the people into the promised land. And to fast forward a couple thousand years, Jesus of Nazareth comes walking on the scene and saying things like, "Are you weary and tired? Come to me and I will give you rest." He comes to his fearful and freaking out disciples and he says, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Jesus doesn't just get them through the storm unharmed, like Moses did. He is the Lord of the storm who literally walks upon it. He is the God of Genesis 1 who is above the waters of chaos, who rules and reigns, is sovereign. And what we see in this story is the God who rules and reigns, is sovereign over all, steps down into the mess and moves towards his fearful and forgetful disciples saying, "I know this isn't your best day. My presence will still go with you, and I will give you rest. I know you've had a couple of hard at-bats. I know people are going to be laughing at you guys a couple thousand years from now when John writes the story. But take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." He's not just the one who parts the sea like Moses. He is the Lord who is present with his people in the midst of the storm and carries them safely, ultimately, to the other side. Jesus is greater than Moses. That, I would submit to you, is what John is doing here. He's like, you guys like Moses, you're looking for Moses, we've got someone greater than Moses. And see, that's what these guys are still learning at this point in this story. They're approaching Jesus as a Moses-like figure who shows the way to follow God. Right? What did John say in chapter 1? The law, the commands, the way to walk with God came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus. So Jesus, he gives us the truth of how God made us to live, but he also gives this great component of grace. And this is what they haven't quite grasped about Jesus yet. They're approaching him like he's Moses, like he'll give them some good instructions, but it's up to them ultimately to figure out. And what this story is about is they've got to see, they've got to learn he's more than Moses. He's not just a teacher who shows you how you should live and how to clean up your life. He is the God who will meet you in the midst of your mess. And I'm telling you, it's not just Jesus' disciples that need to learn this. I think this is a lesson we all need to learn. I don't know how you walk in here. If you're not a follower of Jesus and you've never heard of Moses before, I'll just say this. Jesus is more than whatever guru or teacher you look towards. Increasingly, when stuff goes wrong, we go to AI to solve it, right? What should I do about this? It just occurred to me, I'm like, how quickly I can pull up the phone is the instinct to pray is quick. Jesus is more than Moses, and here's what I will say. Every person, and especially every disciple of Jesus, is in a process of learning the full implications of what we saw on Easter. That whoever believes in Jesus has present tense possession of eternal life. that we have a living hope inside of us that it taps us into another world, that we have a whole new world of possibilities open to us. And the reason I say we're all in a process of learning is to bring this home to you. Like I was thinking about this week, I was reading these scholars talk about maybe it's an ethical miracle. And I was literally laughing. I was like, you dummies didn't even read the text. How'd you get a PhD here? And we can laugh at them. And at some degree, I think you should laugh at them because that's a ridiculous opinion. But here's what began to happen in my heart as I was having a good laugh about all that. And this might hit you on the way home. I was like, do I really believe Jesus did this? Like, do you really believe Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed a stadium full of people? If your answer is yes, then here's the follow-up question the Holy Spirit asked me, because that was my answer too. I'm a pastor, I believe, right? Does my life reflect that I believe that? Here's what God's showing me this week. Though I know in my head that he did this, and I do believe in my heart that Jesus did this, there's no doubt in my mind. Again, if he can speak creation into existence, I just don't know why it's difficult for him to turn bread out of nothing. Even the devil, by the way, knows Jesus can do this. This was one of Satan's temptation to Jesus. He's like, turn the rocks into bread there. We have so-called Christian theologians say with worse theology than the devil. It's like, I have no doubt that Jesus did this in my head and deep in my heart. But how often does that faith work itself out in my life? And I'll be really real with you. What this story is exposing in me is I'm still growing as a disciple of Jesus, like these guys, where I can believe, I can pray big prayers, and then like Andrew, a lot of times I break off in those prayers and start to freak out. And I tend to approach Jesus like a Moses figure. This is why I tell you, the big idea is that Jesus is more than Moses. I think so often I live closed off to the possibilities of faith in my life. Because my instinct isn't to pray. My instinct is I'm smart, I'm capable, I can figure this out. And so I'll tell you, this week as I struggled so much with how to frame this sermon. I really kind of had a hard time even putting cohesive thoughts together. And I just tried it out. I was like, God, I've got the ramblings of a not very good message here. And if I could just give that to you, would you do something that would show people what you're like and encourage us? And I don't know how this sermon's hitting you, but like God did something to me. And I was able to see this text, and the Lord was able to lift my heart. And I'm telling you, I was like, why don't I do that more? Why don't I just start with, I got a half-eaten Happy Meal. Can you do something with it today? Why do I have to hit a wall before I pray like that? I don't know if anyone can. I got one person testifying with me. I am with you. Jesus is more than Moses. And maybe what you need to hear is, if you can resonate with the disciples in this story, who are often forgetful and fail to live out what we know is true about Jesus. If you're like, I fail to approach him as this great wonder worker, if that is where you're at, I want you to notice Jesus' response to his disciples who are forgetful and freaking out on the boat as they fail their test is not, what's wrong with you guys? Didn't you see the sign? What's his response? Take heart. It's me. Don't be afraid. And so I want you to hear 2 things from me, and then I'll pray for you. Jesus is more than Moses. He is the God by whom and for whom we have been made. If you've trusted in Jesus, the Spirit of the living God lives inside of you, and he has opened up a whole new world to you. And I want to just encourage you from this story to do some Jesus math this week. To lean into that world and see what he has for you. He has more for us than we could ask or imagine. Some of you, that's got to be your takeaway today. Jesus being God with us opens the door of possibilities to a whole new world. The other thing I would say is for those of you who, as you hear this, you go, man, why don't I pray more? This story is not here to discourage you, to make you feel like a bad Christian. This story is here to say how great Jesus is. And part of what I believe makes Jesus so great is, as John tells us in the intro, the law came through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And so if you're like, man, I screwed up so bad this week. It's not just I didn't pray, I did stuff that I'm like, how could I do this? What I hope you will see in Jesus meeting his disciples in this story is he is not only the God who opens a doorway to a new world, he is the God who graciously meets you in the midst of your mess and says, take heart, it is I have grace upon grace for you. And so you don't need to freak out. I'm here, I'll get you through it. This is why Jesus is really great. Not just because he opens the door to a new way, but because he carries us safely to the other side. Jesus, thank you for being so much more than we can even wrap our minds around this morning as we look at this story. Lord, I ask for the grace for each of us to just relax into the truth of who you are a little more this morning. Where my brothers and sisters in the room this morning need to be awakened to the fresh possibilities of faith, Jesus, I pray that you would stir in our hearts and give us fresh faith to believe that you are the wonder-working God, that there is nothing impossible with you, that if we would come to you, you could do more than we ask or imagine, and you love to satisfy our souls. And for those in this room who are weary and heavy laden, maybe they're in the midst of a storm and they're like, God, I don't know why you are allowing this. Jesus, I pray that you would mercifully meet them this morning. That you would, in the midst of our anxieties, call to us and say, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. Warm our hearts with your love as we respond to you. In your beautiful name I ask, amen.